I wanted to thank the first panel, our threesome over here. That was a phenomenal panel and really very, very interesting. And I was able to attend at least one of the breakout sessions, and I wanted to really commend the students for a terrific job. I went to the school lunch one, which was incredibly interesting. So wherever you guys are, you have to come to my class. But they all looked so good, and so it was a really tough choice. I hope everybody enjoyed those breakouts. So it's my real pleasure this afternoon to be able to introduce the California Secretary of Food and Agriculture, Karen Ross. I met Karen about a year ago, went up to Sacramento, and we were talking about a number of issues, and I remember driving home saying, I am definitely getting her to Stanford sometime soon. And this is a great event because just great timing, and for this event that we're talking about so many interconnections. So let me just give you a very brief background on Secretary Ross. She comes with terrific experience both at the national level and the state level. She was appointed as the California Secretary of Food and Ag in 2011 under Jerry Brown, and is now continuing on, thank God. And before that, she had been actually the Chief of Staff for U.S. Secretary of Ag, Tom Vilsack. So she had great experience at the national level, understanding and working really on really critical agriculture and food issues. Prior to that, though, she had a very long history in California. For at least 13 years, she was the president of California's Association of the Wine Growers Association, and actually achieved a nationally recognized sustainable wine growers program, which really led to a lot of the sustainability discussions we're having in the state. And so thank you for implementing that. Also, since 2001, was on the California State Board of Food and Agriculture, and actually chaired their vision committee. And so Karen is just somebody who really gets the connections that we're talking about here and really understands what these connections are and how we should move forward as a state. And so we're very, very lucky to engage you in this discussion today. The list of her accomplishments goes on, and I really urge you to just Google her and see what she's all about, because not only is she one of the nicest people I've ever met in government, but she's also got this amazing experience. And one of the parts of her background that I love is that she is a 4-H kid. She grew up on a farm in western Nebraska. I think you're still involved in the family farm. And definitely understands what farmers are dealing with, their decision-making processes, the resource constraints, the climate issues they're up against, the budget issues, the policy issues. There's so many facets of this. But my conversations have also really included her very strong interest in what we eat as a society, and I think she's taken a lot of active initiative in this area as well. And so without going further, I just wanted to pose the first question. But before I do that, I'm chairing this interview with Pamela Matson, Dean of Earth Sciences. As many of you know, Pam has been the Dean of Earth Sciences since,
I don't even want to say.
A while.
2003.
Morrison Professor, or the Goldman Professor in the School of Earth Sciences, has been with Stanford throughout our whole initiative to both create this kind of interdisciplinary scholarly environment that we have here, including the establishments of the institutes and the mechanisms that we really have to work together collaboratively across schools, across departments, and so forth. And Pam has also been on a lot of the visioning committees of Stanford University. So I thought these two were a natural fit as well. So Pam and I will share the stage here in just having a conversation with Secretary Ross. So I wanted to start by just with your background. You know, I love the fact that you came from this farm in western Nebraska and have had, you know, your whole life has been all about this. And you know, it makes you so well prepared for dealing with all the crazy farmers that you're dealing with here. And most of all the crazy politicians you have to deal with. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your background. Sure. And what's been important in the stepping stones you've had and where it's led you today, you know, what you're thinking about.
Okay, so Kona Science is just us, right? So first confession is I grew up on this farm in western Nebraska, which I assure everyone is the middle of nowhere because you can almost see Wyoming from our ranch. And I have three younger brothers, and we were the workforce for the farm. So I learned a lot about hard work, and after driving tractor in the summertime and chasing cattle and all those things, I told my dad in high school, I am not staying in this county. I'm not going to marry a farmer, and I'm not going to be in agriculture. That's what I say. And every position I've ever had, I've worked in agribusiness, and then I discovered politics and opportunities to work on the policy issues, and that's where I found what I wanted to do, this ability to work with people, even when we had different ways of getting to something, a shared goal, being able to work with people to make that happen. So it's the last thing in the world I would have ever thought would happen to me. And I feel so fortunate that every day I get to work in this magnificent state and work with the farmers and ranchers of the state and all of our stakeholders. I really, in many ways, feel that I was meant to do this because agriculture is there's a lot of things about farming that's, the same everywhere, but it's also very different in the Midwest. We're on the western end of the state, so it's very dry climate, and we're dry land farmers there. My dad used to ask why the wagon train stopped because the soils are not great. We have very limited crop choices that we can do because of the climate there. And to come here and discover ag, okay, second confession. When my husband said, we're moving to California, the job of my dreams has opened up, I'm like, do they have agriculture in California? I know, I'm really embarrassing myself. But to see what we have here, because we are blessed with this Mediterranean climate and the ability to grow so many things, and we're doing it in a state that has such special resources and a strong commitment to the environment, and just a spirit of innovation that's reflected in many ways in our economy, but especially in our agricultural sector. And I just feel very lucky to be able to know what's in the heart of a farmer, just as from a farm girl, but to be able to try to bring people together to work on the policy side to make sure that we can keep doing what we can do in a very sound way.
Do you feel like you're trusted by both sides because of that? I mean, you're in a sense a linker between two really different communities.
And I think that's from, when we'd see a clouded vest coming, it's like, oh goody, there's going to be somebody at the door, and you make some iced tea and bring out the cookies, and it's like, oh goody, you get to. But I have this kind of weird sense of being able to make those linkages, and connectivity to me is really, really important because we spend so much time focused on our differences as opposed to how much more we have in common. And I think a lot of that, I was very fortunate to get to start traveling at a time I never thought I would. And travel is the most important way to see all the commonalities we have and the importance of working together. So I have a history working on the policy issues that I did of always reaching out to other stakeholders and to get those other perspectives, sometimes more successfully than others. But it's absolutely critical when we're thinking about the complex issues that we have in the 21st century. We can't just stay where we are and think about the way we used to do it is the same way we're going to try to do it and think we're going to get to a better result. Mm-hmm. So it's absolutely critical, and it's something I'm very passionate about, trying to be that link wherever I can be.
That's great.
So, well, in these kind of discussions, we're all hearing very sort of blunt kind of comments about the drought and so forth, but you're hearing the more nuanced kind of views of farmers throughout the state in different crops and so forth, on policies surrounding the drought and on the drought itself. Maybe you could give us a sense of some of the more nuanced, what are farmers talking to you about?
Well, once we get past just the fear factor, these are people who are risk takers. Farming is risky when it comes to capital, understanding which market is the one that you want to pursue, the timing of the markets, understanding, where the next big issue is going to be, whether it's a food safety issue or something else, or a new pest or disease or whatever it's going to be. So there is a lot of fear because of just the huge uncertainty. And even though at the farm level, you're dealing with a lot of uncertainty and you're constantly adapting, this feels very, very different. I think one of the issues, it's so easy to sit in a place and go, well, they should grow this or they should grow that. But there has to be an understanding of where they are, the crops that are best suited for that, the markets that they know how to do, the system that supports that where they are, and that if they lose 50 or 80% of their water, and so they're going to farm less land, they're committed to maximizing the productivity, the economic return on less land with less water. Thus, we have moved to high-value crops. When I moved here 25 years ago, we had 1 million acres of cotton. This year, there might be 150,000 acres of cotton. The farm community has moved to where markets are, and markets are driven by consumers and consumer demand. And many of the crops are growing for good reasons. As people pay more attention to nutrition and improve nutrition, and we think about my plate and how we want people to eat better, it's what do we grow here? It's leafy greens and vegetables and fruits and tree nuts, which are a very efficient source of protein and fibers. And so it's all those kinds of things that we grow. We ship 2/3 of that to other states and increasingly around the world because we're part of a global economy. So people are weighing lots of different pieces of thing. It's very different than in some areas of this country where there's still a sense of farming for a farm program, not nearly as much as it used to be. And farming for that is very different from farming for a market, and markets move faster than government, and having to make changes, and sometimes that's really harsh. And those are the kinds of things California farmers have been very adept at doing.
So how are they feeling about the groundwater bill? I mean, I think it's interesting that California is responding to the drought in a number of different ways. And I'm sure the Food and Agriculture Agency has been engaged in this pretty deeply.
We were, because having watched more from a distance in my previous life, there were other people to do water. I'm catching up really fast. So it was really interesting last year engaging the conversations with the governor because of his attempts in his first 2 terms as governor on some of the things that he tried to do on water that weren't successful. And he just knew what a really sensitive, controversial topic this was and how could we possibly approach it, what's changed. And so of course all my colleagues were pushing the Secretary of Food and Ag saying, we have to get our arms around this because if we don't, we are giving away our future. And if we don't do it now, when? Because we do depend on groundwater in drought times. But to manage it means we have to intentionally recharge it and manage it so that we have opportunities to continue to grow the kinds of things that we do. So it was a very interesting summer, a lot of meetings. The agricultural community did not feel that it was in a position to be supportive of the bills as they came. It felt that it was coming too fast. There was fear that we would make a mistake because we were acting in a time of drought. We needed to be more thoughtful. But we met with a lot of the farm community, and we had really thoughtful, smart people working on it. And I feel that at the end of the day, I think it's a very balanced, reasonable place for us to go. But the hardest part is implementation. And the hardest part for all the science that we need, I tell this, and I've said this from the very beginning, the social sciences, the behavioral sciences, this is bringing stakeholders together at the local community. And ultimately, they're making decisions about water and water availability that affect their neighbor's livelihood, their livelihood, the access to clean drinking water of others in their community. These are going to be hard decisions. And that's where we need people who are good at facilitating those kinds of difficult conversations, bringing them science, bringing them technical expertise, but also how do you keep people working together as a community?
So that implementation, I mean, how, and that's, I know, I think it has the groundwater, sustainable groundwater plans have to be decided upon in 2016 or 17?
They have to have the government entity that designate who's going to be the lead. And I'm really pleased, as much as Ag was very fearful of this, they are very committed to making this work at the local level. And in many counties and areas of the state, people actually started having those kinds of meetings in September and October before the bill actually took effect. But you get to a certain point, and then all of a sudden, it's like, who's giving up turf to make this work together? So we're still working through some of that. So by the end of 2016, they will have to have that entity designated that will be the lead and lead the process of coming up with a management plan itself. And the high priority districts have to have that done in 5 years.
Wow.
So, you were saying before that California is very diverse in terms of the crops and the climate and the ecosystems that those crops are being grown in and so forth. So as as the groundwater bill and others come into place, they're going to be probably winners and losers, places where they can't do as much agriculture as they used to and other places that are not in such bad shape. How are you thinking about that? What are the preparations to help those who are out of luck?
Well, I'm looking at the next generation of problem solvers right here. And here's my other disclaimer. I'm an incurable optimist.
Yeah, I like that.
And I truly, there's only so much innovation and technology can solve at the end of the day. There's just a very limited resource with many, many people wanting it. But when you think about how casual we are, even now, about water use in all settings, and not just in California, but across this country, water's a free thing. And do we really value something that we tend to think of as very free, or we're not really putting a value on it? And so there's so much that can still be done on conservation. Every Californian has to develop a culture and an ethic of conserving and using every drop preciously. And our friends in Australia have learned that, and they're still horrified at how we use water here. There's so much to be gained by water reuse, recycling water, making connections between the urban sector that pays a lot to treat its wastewater and the opportunities for how that can be used. At the end of the day, there will be, most likely, more fallowing, but we're also learning so much more about how to optimize our resources to get more with less, and doing, we are going to have to increase not just food production writ large, but the nutrition offerings that we're giving to people with a smaller and smaller environmental footprint. We can solve that in California. We can lead that effort in California, and it's like the grand challenge for the 21st century. Yeah. So I still see many ways for us to be able to optimize this resource while we work our way through how do we get to the best conjunctive use program of being able to recharge groundwater basins and being creative about that, to have that resource and still have a healthy mix of crops that we contribute to the world.
It's true. We've been innovative in a number of different ways
Energy
in California.
is a perfect
we might as well
example.
do it here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
And when you drive through the Central Valley, one of the things you're always seeing is these big signs about jobs, loss of jobs. And is it true that in these rural settings where a lot of the water is, some of the fallowing is taking place and so forth, are these lot of layoffs and worsening of poverty, food insecurity? What is the situation in these
first
rural
of all,
areas?
would everybody work with me for immigration reform? Because we commissioned a socioeconomic impact report and really did some modeling to look at how many acres would be fallowed and to use that to dictate where the emergency drought funding would go. And that projected 17,000 jobs that were displaced or lost. We have had some of the population move out of the state or try to do employment in the coastal areas where they were short of labor. And we also, the numbers so far haven't shown that drastic of a layoff, and part of it is because it's people who may not be in the system. Yeah. But we do know that we've provided over 500,000 additional boxes above what food banks normally would give. We've used about $10 million in job retraining, housing assistance, energy assistance. But we also know that the drought impacted the communities where people do have less education, are already living because it's not full-time year-round work, that they're already living at a very low economic level. And that there's a need to really think about how we diversify our economy so that we don't have those pockets of poverty that are happening. But there clearly are people who have been displaced. On the flip side of that, because we haven't gotten immigration reform, because of the challenges of attracting people to work in agriculture, a lot of the planting decisions that have been made in the last decade in particular are looking at availability of land, availability of water, and cost of both of those, and what are less labor-intensive crops. So wherever automation's available, that's also a change in what you see in Central Valley than what you see on the coast still, where it's leafy greens and strawberries.
Yeah.
So, this session, this conference has been a lot about food insecurity and in different parts of the world, and this is making me wonder about food insecurity in California. Those places that you're talking about probably are food insecure, but can you speak more generally about California's issues related to malnutrition and what your agency does about it?
It's easy for those of us who love food and think about food and talk about food and enjoy going out for food to put food in California into that foodie context. And that's great. And people are shocked to know that California suffers from some of the same statistics that are stubbornly persistent in the national economy, with 1 in 6 Californians, US citizens, and 1 in 6 Californians are food insecure. And unfortunately, the vast majority are children or seniors, so 2 ends of the vulnerability spectrum there, we are seeing that those pockets in the Central Valley, which is the last place that you would think that should occur in addition to our urban setting. We have partnered with food banks over the last few years to do more farm contributions of the healthy stuff to get into food banks. And we did an event this year in December here in San Jose. And the food bank director there was telling me she was getting more calls from administrators who've been brought into their schools to improve the test scores, and they're dealing with chronic hunger or malnutrition because the cost of living here is so high that people are resorting to not as good a nutrition for their kids. So it's something that's everywhere, and it's hard to imagine that in such a robust economy as the 8th largest economy in the world, and it's in lots of different places. So the school lunch program is very important. We've invested a lot of our specialty crop block grant programs into local food systems and programs that are about how do we partner with school nutrition directors to link them with farms in the local area to get more of this healthy, fresh stuff to them. But it's an issue, and it shouldn't be. This is a curable problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting because I was meeting, which food bank were you working with in San Jose? I was on a panel with a few of the members of the food banks in between here and San Jose, and one of the issues they were saying was so difficult in making this happen, what you're talking about, was, for example, they could take a lot of produce from farmers' fields, glean them and transport, but they had to pay all the transportation costs, all the gleaning costs, and so forth. And I was just thinking, as you were talking about these displaced workers from the Central Valley, gleaning more and just providing that labor service that would reduce the waste.
This partnership with the State Association of Food Banks has been fabulous because we're really encouraging farmers, sometimes because of market, sometimes because of weather. There's always a period of time where you've got excess of something and it's perishable. And so linking them with the food banks on a very focused program of farms to families has been a really great success. And oftentimes the farmers will do that second picking just because they know it's going to people in their own community. But what's interesting, because of Feeding America, they focus on this program. And this program at times of the year where the State Association of Food Banks, we've satisfied the needs in California, so we're able to send more of that fresh stuff. I have friends who were in Columbus, Ohio, and they went through a food bank there, and they started talking about the drought in California, not knowing there were Californians in the group, because they were worried about continuing to get that stream of fresh fruits and vegetables.
So it's much broader than California.
That's a good point.
So, they can use their financial contributions to help fund some of those types of programs, but we're about really encouraging more direct contributions from farms to those programs as well.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I have a question about soils. I know that your
Dirt.
I love soils. I know your agency has a new initiative on healthy soils, I hope.
We're hopeful that it even gets funded. We get lots of initiatives without funding.
That's right. Okay, but if it gets funded, what's it about? What's it going to?
So does everybody here know that 2015 has been declared by the United Nations the year of the soils? I've been able to educate lots of my friends about that, and they're going, really, soil? And then you talk about all this biodiversity that we walk over every day and how fragile it is and how little we actually still know about it, and that by building the health of our soils, that is one of the most important things we can do for sustainability to maintain productivity. I'm especially excited about doing it this year because if we can build up the soil, organic matter, and carbon, we're addressing climate change, we're sequestering carbon, and we're building water retention. So it's a very important strategy from a climate resiliency point of view as well as from a drought resiliency point of view. There's a lot that we can learn about nutrients and keeping those in place and stopping the movement behind that. There's just, there's multiple benefits for really focusing on this in a very concerted way and working across cabinet, which has been one of the fun things about working for Governor Brown, is that he wants us to work together and solve problems and smash the silos and let's do stuff, and let's do stuff that matters. So we're very hopeful because the governor made the introduction of this a placeholder in his budget introduction in January. We're working on potential funding so that we can create a program for the long-term building of soil health and getting more people to be carbon farmers, and really looking at that. But also incentivizing even more of those kinds of practices. How can we divert even more from landfills and get even more composting to happen? And good composting, there's, you have to, it's a science as well. And really looking at, talking about connecting the dots.
Yeah.
Something that traditionally we've treated as waste. Well, I've told people we've got to get waste out of our vocabulary. Yeah. It's just a byproduct with a different revenue stream. There's so much that can be done with this. There's there's just so many opportunities.
A lot of value.
And we really see this as yet another way with California, because we get to talk about climate change and think about how to solve it. We get to do some things here that in other places, some governors just don't support that.
I know. I was going to ask you exactly about that because we were sitting in a meeting with Jerry Brown. He was talking about the governors, the U.S. governors' meetings that they have, and he said you cannot actually use the word climate when you're with a red governor. So he said there's a clear divide. But you've spent time, in Washington with Tom Vilsack,
yes.
And the lack of conversation that we have on the Hill on a number of these things, and it's so different than what you're seeing in Sacramento in terms of walking across the hall, talking to different agencies. Can you talk a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes and why we're able to get so much done?
And if I can divert for a moment, because it's been really refreshing to see the president, now that he's in his second term, really take on climate change in the ways that they possibly can through executive order, and do not diminish the power of being able to do that. And the second thing I want to say on that is that at USDA, we might not be able to call it that, but when I was there, we were working on a lot of things at the Natural Resource Conservation Service, at Agricultural Research Service. We were doing a lot of things that are leading to some of this great work. And my former boss, Tom Vilsack, who I think has been one of the greatest secretaries of agriculture, just yesterday was asked, he received some great award for his commitment to childhood nutrition and eradicating poverty, said even though he endorsed Hillary after he gave up his run in 2008, said, it's premature for me to endorse anyone unless I know what they're willing to do to eradicate poverty in rural America and how they are going to address climate change and what that will do to agriculture if we don't wake up and do something about it.
Fantastic.
That was amazing. So, across cabinet, I am so lucky to work with the people that I do. We're mature people. Don't call us old, we're mature people with great sets of experiences that have come together, and it's very collegial. These are people I really, really like, and we enjoy each other's company, which is good because we spend a lot of time together. And sometimes it's in contentious, the issues are contentious and they're complex, but we recognize what each of us brings to that, and the governor has empowered us to think that way. So the challenge for us is we can do that at our level, but everybody knows political appointees come and go. How do you create a culture within your agencies so that throughout the bowels of the bureaucracy, it becomes a culture of, well, of course we want to hear CDFA has the fertilizer program and funds research on nutrient management. So of course the water board should want to know what that is. We're creating that kind of culture. That's the hard part of what we're doing.
Yeah, that's great.
And have it be permanent in the organization.
Exactly right. It's like, that's going to be our legacy. If we do it right, it will lead to that more collaborative and using all the perspectives to get to that.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I think even in California, we've been notorious for not having that crosstalk, that planning that includes those cross-agency perspectives. So it's really very cool.
Yeah.
I want to go back to, so the Healthy Soils Initiative, you made the point, is important for a lot of different reasons. It connects a lot of dots too, but it's probably one of the ways that California can prepare for climate change. What are some of the other ways that you're thinking about the impacts of climate, a changing climate on agriculture and how to prepare for that?
So one of the things we did my first year is I used a small portion of our specialty crop block grant funding to convene a specialty crop climate change consortium, because a lot of work, and this is one of the things about USDA, it's still very Midwest centric, and part of that's because the Farm Bill traditionally has been very Midwest centric. So there's a lot of work going on other crops and other situations, not so much for the Western agriculture, irrigated agriculture, and the specialty crops that we grow here. So my science advisor, who's just a terrific person, led this effort, and first of all, we wanted to convene farmers and ranchers to see how they were thinking about it and talking about it. And it was great to get people who volunteered to come together to do that. With scientists, so we went through a process of getting everybody to a shared understanding of what is happening in climate and where the vulnerabilities were, to get that shared understanding. Because some of the people who volunteered to participate said, I'm a skeptic, but it would be irresponsible not to engage in learning more about this. And so we got everybody to that shared understanding, and then they helped lay out a roadmap for us. What are the research needs? What are the adaptation needs? What kind of equipment stuff do we need? Where should the plant breeding be? What are the invasive issues we're going to be doing? How are markets going to change? Because it's easy for us, all of us at the policy level, to overlook something that with less chill hours and earlier warm weather, all of a sudden you're streaming into a very different fruit market that all of a sudden you're bumping into some competition or someone's coming in. And so how do farmers think about all these kinds of things and the changes that they're going to have to deal with? So that's been something we've used throughout our work. I think when the first scoping plan was done, because ag really didn't want to be a part of it, there were maybe 2 paragraphs, and now we have, we've got pages, and we've got chapter on adaptation, and we're feeding stuff into the research funding. We got $10 million for water efficiency from the greenhouse gas reduction program, where we're helping to get the small and mid-sized farmers to get more efficient irrigation or water use by reducing energy, reducing water use, and reducing greenhouse gas. So we use that as a really good roadmap to inform some of our decision making.
In that program, is there funds actually to help the farmers develop more efficient approaches, or overcome that barrier?
This $10 million program that we had in the first drought package a year ago, we just funded 156 projects. The expected greenhouse gas reduction is like 2.1 metric ton of carbon reduction and 317,000 acre feet of water that will be saved on that one. But we also can use that, and we're working at USDA to get them to put greenhouse gas calculations for the conservation practices that many farmers do, and having that,
that'd be good.
and having easy to use calculators, because when we started this grant program, farmers had never been asked to calculate their greenhouse gas reductions before. So how do you get an easy-to-use calculator? How do we get that factored into the thinking?
Yeah, that's great.
That's great. I'm going to move in a second to audience questions. So raise your hand so we can get
Easy ones.
And yeah. So I did want to ask you just one quick question about energy, because this whole connecting the dots is about. And in your context of climate and water, are there conflicts with the energy sector? You know, when we think about the segments that do fracking or other energy development, are you running up against issues there terms of?
Part of the drive for disclosure and notification in the fracking legislation that passed 3 years ago was some of the people who helped to drive that were some of the farmers in Kern County in particular, where a lot of that activity is. And the water issues, because of all the water they bring up, can it be treated and used? And so there's starting to be more conversations about that. But some of the other issues have been just on the land use issues of siting large-scale solar farms, because a lot of farmers have sited solar that runs their pumps, it runs if they've got any processing at all, it's running their own operations. And the wine sector, I'm really pleased because of our sustainable wine growing program, we were real leaders in embracing alternative energy for our own operations and taking ourselves off the grid, or now that we've got bills to actually put it back on. So there have been some conflicts, but it's more of a local land use issue and trying to get compatibility with that. And where a real opportunity is, as long as we are the #1 dairy state with all the cows that we have, and the short-term climate pollutants. So right now we've got a work group going on that will feed the short-term climate pollutant plan for the state. Real opportunity to accelerate dairy digesters, so that, and because we spent 3 years mapping out all the ways we regulate it to make sure that we can get and we do a consolidated permit review to make sure we're not doing something that will cause a water problem or an air problem, have that mapped out so we can meet those environmental goals and reduce greenhouse gas emissions and methane and better manage the water and create energy or transportation fuels, huge opportunities for that, and digestate, so we're moving nutrient from like overabundance areas to places in the state where people spend a lot of money to import nutrients. So it's like, whoever knew, when I saw the title of poop and pesticides, I'm thinking, I thought I was the only person who ever talked about poop, because I get really excited about cow poop and what's possible since they're here already.
Where we worked in Mexico, we saw those kinds of digester systems coming in with joint implementation, and they were getting funds from Japan to do it. And I kept thinking, why not in California?
And we should, and several Californians went down to Mexico in December to do that tour with Natural Resource Conservation Service.
Fabulous. That's great. Fabulous. That's cool.
Fantastic. So let's open it up to some questions. There's mics coming around, hopefully. Here they come. And just introduce yourself, please.
Thank you for being here, Secretary Ross. My name is Lisa. I'm a student at the Graduate School of Business. I'd really like to know, both in your role and for the Department of Agriculture overall, how you measure success and the reasoning behind the choice of that measurement.
The choice of
that measurement that you use.
Yeah, so that's kind of a challenge for government, for all of our talk about performance measures and what are the metrics. It's still, and I spent a lot of time on this at USDA because OMB really started driving a lot more of this. And just to get everybody to come together to go, what is a performance measure? What is a metric? There's huge need to do more of that. So we use, sometimes it's very simplistic stuff, but that helps get everybody to thinking this way. So it could be, if we could put this online, how many more people could get their licensing needs taken care of, and can we measure that over time? So our IT people have been very helpful in thinking through those kinds of things. When I look at our specialty crop block grant program, we're a pass-through that comes through the Farm Bill, and because California has the most specialty crops, we get the most money, so it's $17 to $19 million a year, which for a little agency like mine is a lot. I keep asking these questions. So we catalog what we funded. how long are we following them through to see what their success was so that we could count that for success to know this was the right bucket to put these things into, and trying to train people to do that. But quite frankly, the place where we have the best metrics are in our environmental programs that are run by the Air Board or the Water Board, and especially with the greenhouse gas reduction program, and now that there's real money in cap and trade, the metrics for that are very hard. So anything that we might do in soil health is going to have it has to have a verifiable, quantifiable greenhouse gas reduction for us to be able to do that. So I think that's going to help drive more of this whole metric thing. But I would, in my experience, and I've only been in government for 7 years now. I was in the private sector before, and we just did stuff. I think it's, it's being able to count services for dollars and which one was the best way of delivering it. I don't think we're really good at that kind of stuff yet. So we need lots of bright MBAs to want to be a part of government and help us all do process improvement in that very regard.
Hi, my name is Deborah Cruz Garcia, and my question is about pesticide use. I am wondering, there's a lot of pesticides and fungicides used in California, and there's obviously a population that likes food without that.
Right.
And I'm wondering if there's a plan on the part of the state to try to reduce those, or is the idea we're just sort of stuck with them, that's the way that we farm?
Yeah, there's been a lot of shift to newer materials that have a much better environmental fate to them. And a lot of this is driven by the markets, again, because of the growth in the organic sector in particular. That's really driven a lot of the changes that are happening. I would say a real keen focus right now at the Department of Pesticide Regulation. Pesticides used to be a part of the Department of Food and Agriculture. And when Governor Wilson was in office and created the California Environmental Protection Agency, they moved that program over to EPA. So we have a lot of interaction with them. A real focus for them right now has been on the issue of fumigants, with methyl bromide being phased out and the continued use of that, but there are very few fumigants. Quite frankly, that's one of the interests of soil health. Another thing in soil health is to really get track record and collect the data of how the measures for soil health could also help convince more people and prove to people that maybe we can move further from fumigants than we already are. We just made, once somebody in the Brown administration makes a decision, we all own it, right? But in November, early December, a big decision that increased buffer zones to mitigate any potential public health issues from the use of chloropicrin is another thing that's taken place. The department right now is in notification. So as those kinds of regulatory changes happen, farmers themselves are looking for alternatives, and they're looking for ways, especially in a state like California where so much urban sprawl has gone into what previously was farming country. And a real clash right now. Schools don't have to go through the local land use stuff, and schools because they want the cheaper land, so they go out and are building schools in the middle of farming country. So those kinds of land use changes also impact farmers looking for more and more alternatives to what they're doing in that regard. But a strong commitment to IPM and really doing more as far as really being in the fields, doing the pest counts, understanding where the economic thresholds are before we use any type of material, organic or other. So there's a real commitment there, but we grow a lot of different things, and there's a lot of stuff that's used to try to get that crop to market.
Somebody over there. There's that woman in the middle.
Where'd the microphones go?
Oh, okay.
Somebody.
There
Oh,
she is.
okay, hi.
Hi, my name is Shannon Knucklegate. Gosh, thanks for all the wonderful solutions that you're having. I just wanted to ask about a couple of them, or about four.
Okay.
One would be aquaponics, where I was wondering what kind of commitment's been going forward there, since, of course, the land use is small. You could have 1 million pounds of food on 3 acres, and also 85% water efficiency, build it anywhere you have land use, no pesticides, no herbicides. And then also wondering, there are changes for using purple water, which is filtered water, and it's now going to the oceans and putting that instead into reservoirs to replenish the water tables.
Groundwater.
Okay, because I think that that needs policy. And then another one is energy, looking at funding energy sources that don't use any water. 90% of all power plants are very, very water intensive, especially fracking. And then another question is, are you also looking at, there's a lot of waste I see in showers, shower heads, and efficiency, not just, not flow control, but efficient use. And when I was in Tunisia a couple of weeks ago, I was going to take a picture and send it to you, because there's this really cool thing, but then we had the terrorists, and I had to evacuate.
Gee. There's a lot of questions there, so maybe
All right, pick one.
pick one.
So
and,
I'm going to, there's answers to all of those things. I'm going to go through them really fast. And I'm going to start with the last one first because it was part of the governor's executive order a few weeks ago. And the California Energy Commission has already acted on standards for shower heads, faucets, toilets that will meet new standards, stuff that's actually pretty much available, but now it's going to be more and more the only stuff that's available, so that's already taken place. And incentive programs, and a lot of the local utilities will be really accelerating getting that stuff out the door. The energy thing, yes, as part of our drought task force, really looking at energy, but another part of the governor's executive order, it had 27 parts to it, so there's a lot to it. Establishing the California Water Innovation Initiative, which will be housed at Energy Commission because of the great track record. California has done so much on energy conservation and renewable energy, so using that as a model to really start driving innovation and get it commercialized as quickly as possible. So looking at big and little things like shower heads. Aquaponics. I have a huge personal interest in this because it can be done in urban settings, and I think it's really important wherever we can embrace urban agriculture and having food being grown closer to where the people are. It keeps us interactive with our food source. And the worst gap we have, and it just keeps getting more of a schism, is between farmers and eaters. And you know, my favorite part of this food chain is the eating part, but I really value what farmers do, and I think it's really important. And so aquaponics, I think, has a great future in the state. There's no place in state government. I just had this conversation with the science fellows before I left today. I'm very interested in getting more aquaculture done because it's a huge protein source. It's overfished. There's lots of reasons for us to do more of this. There's one person, it's regulated over at Fish and Wildlife based on the species issues, and I spent quite a bit of time with Chuck Bonham about just give me the little piece about we'll go inland, we'll go into urban settings, but not a real concerted effort, although at the local food policy councils, there's a lot of work being done on that. And I forgot the fourth question already.
That's good.
I have a sieve for a mind on a Friday afternoon, and by the way, I applaud all of you for being here on a Friday afternoon.
Why don't we take?
That's part of the reuse, and last year there was streamlining on any kind of way of reusing water. We used to in a silo, we just treated stormwater as stormwater, and now it's about stormwater capture. So I think you'll see a lot of transformative stuff happening in that regard.
Hi, I'm Nick Sarkeesian. I know that Governor Brown has caught a bit of heat recently for excluding agriculture from the water reduction mandates that have been announced recently. And I'm familiar with agricultural spokesmen who communicate that they're already facing, severe reductions in their water allocations. However, I was listening to a U.S. congressman recently who was highly critical of Governor Brown's, or the lack of policy with respect to almond growers, new investors, not legacy, almond growers, being allowed to put in new orchards when 80% of our almond, production is exported. We're essentially exporting water. I'm just wondering, is there a policy issue there, and do you have a thought about that?
Well, Governor Brown, and just again yesterday, was pretty vocal about the big brother of government telling farmers what to farm and where to farm it. However, there's a very important land use element here, and land use is local. And we saw, as an example, where local government has addressed this a little bit, but there's a need to do more, is what happened 3 years ago in the Paso Robles area and northern San Luis Obispo County, where the county said, and this was because I think it was Harvard that was the big pension fund behind a new development for vineyards there. No planting of permanent crops unless you can prove the offset to do that. So that's an example of the tools that are available at the local level. And at the end of the day, it's really hard for farmers to compete with that kind of money for what they're willing to pay for the land and then to do that kind of stuff. So there's a very strong, I think the sustainable groundwater management SGMA will definitely address that. The governor feels strongly that is a local responsibility and that the tools are available there. Did I dodge that well enough? I will just say that, and this is an early calculation, 41% of the irrigated land in the Central Valley will have at least 80% of its water gone this year. And it's hard for some of those farmers because they don't have access to groundwater to conserve that. So, and that's why we're making these continued investments to get more and more small scale and mid-sized farmers who may not have the capital to do more efficient irrigation as well. So that's our commitment to that.
David LaBelle, I'm just interested broadly, as you're learning about California agriculture and your new position, what's been the biggest surprise to you? Sorry, that's a tough one.
How much time I spend on dairies and dairy pricing. California is the only state that has its own milk marketing order where I determine the regulated price of milk. We're the only state where every hundredweight of milk that's sold from the farmer to a processor must be sold at a regulated minimum price. And 3 years ago, when the severe drought in the Midwest was happening, it turned the California dairy model upside down because we're a feed deficit state. So for years, we were importing cheap corn with cheap energy to grow the dairy sector. And then all those feed prices tripled. And milk prices, because of demand and the economy, went down. And that's how we lost a lot of dairy farmers. But I was in the middle of trying to be that. Wow. So that was a surprise to me. A couple other things. I regulate inedible kitchen grease, IKG, and I work with the rendering community. And did you know that IKG is actually at a premium? Talk about waste products that now have value. Yeah. And so we've now teamed up with the Highway Patrol because of people who steal that stinky, inedible kitchen grease behind every restaurant that fries anything at all. That was a real surprise to me. My division of weights and measures is tiny, but every scale has to be accurate in the state, and it's verified by our people working with the ag commissioners. Well, guess what? That little tiny agency right now is the bottleneck to more zero emission fuels being available for cars in the state, because if you're going to sell it into the stream of commerce, there have to be standards for how you're going to price it, dispense it, type evaluate that, so we're in that. We're even in the middle of some of the Uber and Lyft discussions, because you can get in a different car with a different driver and get charged a different price even if you're going the same way. And so the taxi companies have brought that to our attention. I said, like, who knew? Oh, and then I have fairs and expositions, besides, squashing invasive species and trying to protect animals in the state from animal diseases. Who knew that I would have such variety? See why I love to get up and go to work every day?
Yeah, unfortunately, we are just about out of time, but we are going to have a reception afterwards, and I urge you to come bring your questions to Secretary Ross. I just wanted to conclude before we close the session, because there's so many people, I think, in this audience. You do have a fascinating job, now that you're saying this, right? So many students and faculty would love to figure out how to be helpful. How do you use scholars at different universities? How can we be helpful in some of the missions that you have now? How can we make a better connection with you?
That's really great. So a couple or 3 or 4 really specific ways for us have been some of the first people who came to see me about nitrates in groundwater and educated me that you have a fertilizer program so that you are registering these things, and then you fund research and education and outreach. And a report that was done 20 years ago was the basis for that. You need to pay attention to this program and improve it. And it needed improvement, and one of our harshest critics from the environmental justice community in front of a whole room of environmentalists complimented me 3 weeks ago of the progress we've made. Well, that is reaching out to all different kinds of academics, and especially through cooperative extension. So you've got that translational research in addition to, here's the stuff we know, how do we translate it and get it into the hands of people. We created a searchable database. If you want the 30-second version, the 3-minute version, or the 300-page version, you can get that by crop, and we're putting a lot into that. So that's one. All the work that we're doing in climate, absolutely connecting with my science advisor. He's gotten to know a lot more people. He's a UC Davis alum, moved here from Sri Lanka and went to Massachusetts. I don't hold that against him. He finally came to Davis and did that. But climate is one area where we're always looking for expertise. With this Healthy Soils Initiative, I can imagine there's going to be tremendous opportunities to partner on that. And then I'm thinking about, we have a farm to fork office, and really with limited dollars, really, and being a connector with the food policy councils and the school nutrition directors of how do we create really robust systems and people connect with us. Because at the end of the day, if we can feed our kids better, they'll achieve their potential, and that's our future. So it's really important. So those are just a few ways I can think of.
Well, let's thank Secretary Ross and